Hello and welcome. Dia Eve ma anam corda. Hello, my soul friends. It's a real privilege and a joy to be landing in here to come and connect with you all today. I hope that wherever you are, you're feeling well. The mornings have certainly been taking a turn this November. The last few mornings now have things been frozen in lots of places and ways. So I'm wondering how it is where you are, whatever part of the world that you're in, and you're very welcome into this contemplative Advent space. So no matter where you are, we are all on planet Earth. At least I hope so. If anyone is somewhere else, please let me know. I would be endlessly curious to know where that is. But we are all rooted on the planet Earth. No matter what hemisphere we're in, no matter what continent we're on, no matter what country we're in, we are connected through the earth, through the soil, through the air, through the waterways, and through the fire that is at the heart of all life. And what I want to bring to you today is a contemplation on where Earth is, where we are on Earth at this moment, and where we might potentially be going. So, in many ways, we're standing at a threshold of what could either be a sunset or a sunrise. Perhaps it's both. So An Taoiseach, where I'm coming to you from in the Ecology Centre, was named for the threshold. So An Taoiseach is the Irish word for the threshold, and that is the point between two places, the crossover. It's a liminal space. It's often a space of great change and becoming and unbecoming all at once. And really, every moment is a threshold. Sometimes we don't live that because our lives are maybe caught up in the rigmarole of the daily process and the chores that need to be done or whatever it is that we're here to do. But really, we can live in a way where we're constantly approaching life as a threshold moment. And certainly that's part of what we do here at An Taoiseach. I was listening to a podcast recently with the wonderful late John O'Donoghue. And in it, he actually spoke specifically to the word threshold and where it comes from. So in the English language, it comes from thrashing, which is when you separate the grain, you take away the husk and you're left with the bit that's going to become the best flour. So as John described, he said, it's a place where we move into a more critical, challenging, and worthy sense of fullness. And in many ways, Advent as a season, as a period of waiting, of expectancy, of hope, is a time where we get to move towards that place of more fullness. And as the words there, he wrote critical, challenging, and worthy. It's not necessarily easy to be at a threshold. And we see that in so many ways across our earth, whether it's social strife, change in weather patterns and the way people are suffering in the face of that, the biodiversity crisis and the incompatible ways that we live often on planet Earth, which could be a trauma response to, a very difficult history that humanity has had. Like we have two very recent world wars and are potentially in the throes of a third one that have all left us quite rattled, and a lot of the systems that are growing across the earth at this time, with that view of like exponential growth and an infinite summer, a lot of those started up out of machinery that was left over from World War II. And in many ways, we have this kind of mechanistic warlike system that's producing food and clothes and, has taken it away from the handmade nature of most people. And that, of course, is causing a lot of issues for ourselves as human beings, for our plant and animal kin, for people all over the world, no matter where they are. And especially, of course, there are people who live in poorer areas or areas that are which often coincide with areas where Indigenous people live. A lot of the time, as we know, they're often getting the brunt of these challenges, but really it's for everybody. Everybody is suffering right now in the world. And in many ways, as the Buddha said, life is suffering. And what Jesus emulated on the cross is that it is through suffering that our love is given even more meaning. So while there is lots of suffering that's happening on our planet and potentially throughout the cosmos, it's not to mean that we should give up faith or that we shouldn't continue to live at this threshold point and learn to continually bring hope and joy and love there. And I really feel in my heart and rooted in my faith that that is really a huge part of humanity's role in the cosmos, on planet Earth. It is that we can bring hope and joy and love and peace in all the small things that we do in our days in as many ways as we can. So there's some of my thoughts on that. And in that context of this very rapidly changing world in lots of ways, I heard somebody share once that it's almost as if you were to put all of humanity together as one, you could almost age them as a delinquent teenager, someone who's really, avidly going against the rules of their parents and testing the boundaries of the world and finding their way and finding themselves. And in the process, maybe making a bit of a mess, breaking hearts, getting drunk, doing things that you shouldn't really, rebelling, really. And in many ways, it does seem like that's what we're doing in the context of, say, Mother, Father, God, or Mother, Father, Earth. It's as if we're rebelling against our divine and earthly parents, and we're testing the limits of ourselves as people, as humanity, as individuals, but very much as a collective. And in that, I've heard it said that it's as though Earth herself is also going under an initiation from being a mother or a parent to being a grandmother or a mother going to be a grandmother or a grandparent. And I found that a really helpful thing to contemplate, that the sentient Earth herself is undergoing a process of transformation. And that we, as a species living upon her, are also undergoing a transformation. And humanity is in a unique position. Not that we're better than or, special compared to everything else, but we are different in the sense that we have language and we wield consciousness in a way that we haven't seen in other species do, at least not in the way that we know it. Now, that's not to say that animals don't have hugely complex and diverse ways of communicating. Like, for example, if we were to consider the orca, the killer whale, technically all killer whales are one species, but across the whole Earth, they have become so diverse in how they hunt and how they live and how they communicate that it's almost as though they have different dialects. Not even almost, they do have different dialects, and they're beginning to become so distinguished and so unique in all of the ways that they express themselves as beings that scientists are at this threshold of wondering, should they be classified as separate subspecies because they're getting so different, which is really interesting. So we do see a huge diversity in the natural world, and yet, there isn't an orca sitting here talking to you through the camera. Like, it's a human and you're a human, and we have this interesting and innate ability to communicate and to wield consciousness, or to be conscious of consciousness. As somebody said, humanity is like God's experiment of consciousness becoming conscious of itself. And I find that a really interesting thing to contemplate. And so if we were to put us all together and we're on our planet Mother Earth and we're like delinquent teenagers, then we might surmise from like the biological laws of nature, the natural process of initiation that young species go through to become matured, animal or plant, that we're going through an initiation ourselves. And I believe, and I think other people see it this way too, but that invitation is to cross the threshold to become more full in our expression of who we are, and to step into a mature adult consciousness, to step into a true, authentic, embodied expression of what it is to be human. And what it is to be human, includes a whole vast spectrum from very deep grief to the heights of love and everything in between. And I really feel that our path is to, be stretched and feel the fullness of the human experience. And that is by no means an easy ask. And yet we're kind of in this big widening. And in lots of ways, I see that the deep grief and suffering we have on our planet and the real optimistic hope and excitement and, kind of like development and creativity that we're seeing are two sides of that full spectrum, the full wide berth of what it is to be human and our process of becoming a mature and conscious species on Earth. So Brian Swimme and Thomas Berry are two philosophers that have very much influenced the work here at An Taoiseach, and their views on cosmology and the history of the Earth and the history of the cosmos, something that they have, I suppose, in one way prophesized or contemplated, is that we're at this threshold, and if we make this leap well, if, as I've said, we actually step into that mature consciousness, we become a mature species on planet Earth, we have the potential to learn to live in harmony with the Earth and each other in a whole new way that hasn't yet been tried that we know of. Sometimes people like to harken back to older civilizations and say, oh, well, this was so much better in that. But, no time on history can really ever, on Earth's history, can ever really be compared to anything else, especially when we have such limited lenses to view it with. We can't really know what that was like. And all we can really do is be with what we have now, in the now. And what we do have now is seeing that we have many systems that aren't compatible with thriving life. And yet, in our heart of hearts, as Charles Eisenstein says, the more beautiful world that we know is possible does include us living in harmony with the earth and her creatures and the plants and the animal kin and the stone people. And there's so much in indigenous wisdoms and philosophies that can teach and show us that, whether it's ancient Celtic traditions or traditions from, Abiyala, South America, First Nations people of Turtle Island, America, African nations, Aboriginal or people in Australia, First Nations people there. There's huge stores of this living wisdom. And there has been this prophecy that has come out of South America that says when the condor of the South flies with the eagle in the North, the world will know peace. And in many ways, that feels like part of the big transition that we're all part of, whether we're conscious of it or not, or aware of it or not. Of course, if you're listening to this video, I'm sure it is something you contemplate. So there are just a few kind of ways that I have come to contemplate and consider where we are on the planet and this transition into mature adult consciousness, so that, as Brian Swimme and Thomas Berry prophesized or predicted, we hope, that we can step across the threshold into the ecozoic era. Joanna Macy would call this the Great Turning. Or Glenn Algebrock, he's an Australian philosopher, he would say that it's the Symbiocene, where we're learning to live symbiotically, a new era where humanity lives symbiotically with the earth. And that's, of course, juxtaposed with what we're in now, which is called the Anthropocene, where human influence on the earth is at such a significant kind of critical mass that our footprint on the earth has now forever changed the geological record of time on earth. And what the hope with predictions of the Ecozoic era or the Symbiocene or the prophecies of, prophets, whether it be in our Bible, the prophecy that like love has won, or, and prophecies from First Nation peoples that say the same, love has won. How are we living into that? The hope is that in that triumph of love has won and we're living in that harmony of love and truth, that would also become apparent in the geological record of time, that in a million years, if the Earth is still existing in our solar system, that whatever beings might be living on the planet and studying and curious and, on this path of consciousness, that they too might look at that geological record and see that we have learned to live in harmony with the earth. And, that's what I suppose so many of us are working towards, is with that vision for at least 7 generations ahead of us in mind. How do we preserve what's here? How do we pass on a legacy of love that lives in harmony with the life around us? So yeah, they're part of the contemplations, and I'm looking forward to kind of deepening into these things over Advent. Um, I think that the Wisdom Jesus, the book that we're reading in our book club, has a lot to offer us on how we learn to live that promise of love has won, which Jesus emulates in his teaching, in his death and his resurrection. That promise is so beautifully, completely offered to our soul. And as John Main, he taught Christian meditation, he said the future of religion is that every person who's called on that path will end up walking a mystical path where they're seeking to know the experience of God in their body. And I think this is a huge piece of the puzzle of this transition to mature adult consciousness, is to really begin to relate with the fullness of God, the fullness of love as it is expressed throughout the cosmos. And how do we live that in our being with authenticity and sincerity and move forward from that place? And I know many of you are doing this in your own ways already. And I just hope it's helpful to hear some other frameworks and ideas and, storytelling around this transition and this threshold, the An-Tairseach that we are at right now. So thank you very much for joining me today. I'd love to hear your thoughts or contemplations and your reflections, and I hope to see you soon. God bless and take care.